Hey everyone, I'm Ashleigh Banfield, and this is Drop Dead Serious. Thanks so much for being here. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you if you have. More news in the Nancy Guthrie case. I can't tell you how many people ask me, did they ever find Nancy Guthrie? There's a reason why people don't know or haven't got an update, and it's because we're at 6 months. We're at 6 months since Nancy Guthrie disappeared, and we are no further, arguably, in this investigation than we were on day one. In fact, things are kind of going downhill if these latest reports bear out. And I'm going to talk to somebody who used to be the boss of Sheriff Chris Nanos. Sheriff Nanos worked for my guest today for 3 decades before he became sheriff. And so this boss of Sheriff Nanos has a thing or two to say about what's going on in this case, how they've handled it, where it stands, what he's hearing from his guys, and also what he thinks about Sheriff Nanos and how he's managing and handling this case, and what might be happening with the FBI. Because right now, it should be a really good relationship, and, well, when you hear what I'm about to tell you, I don't think that's going to foster any good feelings. So let me start here. My colleague and dear friend Brian Enton has reported something new, and it's weird. Yet again, the FBI agents are in the back of Nancy Guthrie's house. They're behind her house. They've come back again 6 months into this investigation. They are back looking around. Why? Good question. But my guest today actually might have an answer, and it actually does make a bit of sense. So you'll hear that in a moment. And then also this news about the ransom note. Okay, so you probably saw my episode a week or two ago that Sheriff Nanos decided to publish the first 2 ransom notes. At least the notes they believe have the most credibility, tend to believe are real ransom notes from the actual kidnapper of Nancy Guthrie. The first one asked for all the money, give me $4 million by this date and $6 million by that date, or she gets it. And then the second one saying, oh dear, so sorry, didn't realize how sick she was, but she died shortly after we took her and we buried her with nature, and no more requests for money. So that's also probably a good key as to why it's probably real. Because if it's a scammer wants money. They're not sending notes to say, I'm sorry she didn't survive. They're sending money requests, whether it's the first or the second or the third. And usually there's a lot of immediacy to it. But that second note didn't have any of that. So maybe that's why. Plus the details in the ransom note, Apple Watch, Nancy's Apple Watch, it's white, it's on the floor by her bed. Those are details that are very specific. And so those might be the reasons why they tend to believe those notes were real. So Sheriff Nanos decided to release both of those notes. What I didn't realize at the time was that the Sheriff's Department released the notes unredacted with the Bitcoin wallet address visible to anybody. Now, I didn't see it. It was probably the flash of time in between them releasing it, realizing the folly, and then pulling them back, but a lot of people did. And web sleuths got a hold of those Bitcoin addresses, the Bitcoin address on the ransom note, and checked it out. They went and they looked, and they saw the transaction that happened. And you've probably heard this in much of the reporting in the last 6 months as well, that the FBI actually put some money into that Bitcoin wallet, just a bit, not much, just a little tickle of the wire. What we did not know is what the FBI did as well as putting a little money in that Bitcoin wallet. And now we do, because Sheriff Nanos' department released the note unredacted with the wallet address, and the sleuths were able to go there. So the sleuthers were able to get in and take a look around that Bitcoin wallet address. And they were able to see not only the transaction, right? The FBI put a little bit of money in there to tickle the wire, but they were also, we knew that, but they were also able to see something else we didn't know. And the something else we didn't know is that the FBI sent a little message. At least it appears it's the FBI that sent the little message to the ransom seekers. And that message was posted as a public message at that wallet address, and it read, "We are ready to pay contact us, followed by a link to a private web page. Oh, man. I mean, that is stuff that just shouldn't be getting out in public, right? Now, to their credit, after they screwed up, they realized they screwed up, and the sheriff's department yanked that accidental public posting, unredacted ransom note with the Bitcoin address. They pulled it, and then they redacted it, and then they re-released it redacted. But the damage was done, and that shit was out there, right? And so now sleuthers were able to see the transaction that was actually done to try to, lure those ransom seekers out a little bit, pull them out a little bit, give them a little bit of money just to say, okay, we're here, and here's our message. So, look, that is dumb AF, right? Especially in something this high profile. I mean, we're at 6 months, y'all. We are at 6 months, and every single move is scrutinized. Sheriff Nanos has had the shit taken out of him on this. So you would think that every time you push send or enter or whatever, you're triple checking that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and that Bitcoin wallet addresses aren't there unredacted. But that happened. Yeah. And so the big question, of course, becomes, are these screw-ups happening the way we see them in public? Are they happening at this level where we're not seeing them, behind the scenes in the investigation? Because here we are, y'all. Hi, August 14th, I'm recording this. And she disappeared on February 1st. February, March, April, May, June, July. Halfway through August. Are they any further along? Are they ever going to find out who the hell was on that porch? Who was on her ring cam? Who took her? Who sent those notes? Where is she? Are we any closer? Or is this Keystone Cops just bungling every move? As it turns out, there's somebody who knows a lot about sort of the work product and the techniques of Sheriff Chris Nanos, because he was Sheriff Nanos's boss for like 3 decades. So he knows the man behind the badge, and he knows the attitude behind the badge, and he also knows the style of management. And so my guest today is Rick Castigar. He's the former Pima County Chief Deputy. And he's got a thing or two to say about why we are where we are. And that is what seems to be stymied in this investigation. And it comes from the top. It's the fact that people aren't allowed to do their jobs and are being hammered down every time they try. And so if they're being knocked up against a brick wall every time they try to get through to the other side of the investigation, well, how long is it going to take us to get through or over that wall? Really good answers from Rick Castigar, a long-ranging conversation, including his theory about what may have happened, what happened early on, and whether we're ever going to get answers in this case. Here's our conversation. Rick, thanks so much for being on Drop Dead Serious.
It's my pleasure.
Let's jump right in. One of the most recent headlines in the Nancy Guthrie case is that Sheriff Nanos decided to post the ransom notes, the first 2 ransom notes that came in, post them publicly. And I guess, unfortunately for the Sheriff's Department, they were posted publicly, unredacted, before the folly of their ways had been recognized and they pulled it back. But it was too late. Online sleuths caught it. They were able to track down the Bitcoin wallet that was the redacted part, and they were able to see the transaction that I'm only guessing the FBI had made, the tickling of the wire, so to speak, but also a public comment, quote, "We are ready to pay, contact us." That seems like a colossal mistake, but I'm wondering if in the common work of the Sheriff's Department every day, if this is a regular mistake with just big consequences because it's so high profile, or how do you see it?
Well, I certainly see it as a significant mistake, and it continues to amaze me with the number of mistakes this case has generated coming from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And I attribute this to the leadership of the organization. I've known and worked with Chris Nanos, the sheriff, for over 3 decades. I've seen him micromanage things to the point of creating problems on investigations. His history, interestingly enough, is really just focused on investigations. He's been there for nearly 40 years, and all he's done his entire career has been investigations. And he has a myopic uh, scope of what a police department should run, how it should run, and what it's like. And he involves himself in minutia, and and he's got people to the point where they're afraid to do what they know best to do because they could be, there may be repercussions. So it troubles me that this Bitcoin address was released. It creates problems for not just the Guthrie family, who now could have an onslaught of people purporting to be involved in the crime, but really have no involvement whatsoever. It takes away an element of the evidence that the investigators can use to establish the integrity of somebody they may catch someday and determine the Bitcoin address. And now it's out there. So anybody could say, that's mine. And it's problematic. I'm troubled by it. I'm embarrassed by it, Ashleigh, having put my life's work into that organization. And it's just another example of poor leadership.
I'm curious about what that kind of a misstep does to the relationship between the Pima County Sheriff's homicide investigators and the FBI officers who are working on this case on this joint task force. I mean, I sort of feel like I wish I were a fly on the wall, but man, that really did thwart a lot of what the FBI is trying to do.
Well, there's a number of things that I think your viewers really don't understand with regard to the relationship with this police department and the FBI. And it really stems from its leader, Chris Nanos. A lot of folks don't know this, but back in 2016, we're talking 10 years ago, Chris was appointed as the sheriff. He didn't win the election, but somebody had to run the place, and he was appointed. And during that time, the FBI was conducting an investigation of public corruption effectively. And they are the ones who are charged with that responsibility. When a police official does something illegal or unethical, the FBI investigates. They were doing that against a couple of individuals in his department, the sheriff's department, Chris Nanos. And Chris had a relationship at the time with the FBI, and he asked them very plainly, and I was there at the time, I remember this, would you please keep me apprised of the progress of this investigation? They said they would. They didn't. He got very angry. And when I say angry, I'm talking about an individual who gets red-faced, flushed, starts to perspire, and it's just so visible, it's kind of troubling. And he became angry at the FBI. He got on the local news here and he said words to the effect, listen, if you guys, the FBI, want to know how to do a police investigation, come see me and I'll teach you how to do a police investigation. That's arrogant and it burns bridges. So Chris has had a long-standing disdain for the FBI. And certainly in this particular case, how many examples could I share with you? The blood was traipsed upon by a news media outlet. The DNA material was sent to a company in Florida who has to get their certification and training from who else? The FBI. And why not give it to the FBI? What's really sad about this is Chris's ego has gotten in the way of and has, in my opinion, deflated the integrity of this investigation. And it's troublesome to me. And I've been vocal about it. And some people might say I'm just a sore loser. I'm retired. I don't really have anything to gain here. But it's just sad to see the outcome of this. They, on day 2, when they really understood that Nancy was abducted, they, in my opinion, and if I were the sheriff, I would have done this, I would have turned the case entirely over to the FBI and subordinated the sheriff's department to them, let them handle this case, and we would provide boots on the ground and whatever else was necessary, our investigators, what have you. Chris has not done that to this day. He says they're involved, And yes, they are, but he stifles their ability and he stifles their autonomy in handling elements of this case that he shouldn't, but he does.
On that day too, I had a very high level sheriff's source tell me that they had zeroed in on the brother in law and they were considering him as a prime suspect. And then we learned later on that they had seized the brother in law and his wife's car. They kept it for, better part of 2 months. They searched their home in the dark of night. Do you have any information from your former colleagues that was the focus of the sheriff's department early on, and that perhaps that was sort of a tunnel vision that stopped them from finding Porch Guy and everything else that we don't know today?
I'm going to address the issue of Porch Guy with you first and then kind of come back to the idea of investigating the family members. The video that was later determined to come from a Google Nest camera was not part of the sheriff's department's consideration. As a matter of fact, they knew she had a camera out front, but she didn't have a subscription to it. In other words, the videos weren't kept in the cloud. So they dismissed any opportunity to find any video on that camera and went about the next thing. Then the next thing became, we got to look at the family. Now, cops out there who might be listening to me will understand completely. You don't rule out any potential here. And we don't know who's committed this crime. I have some theories. We can talk about that in a little bit. But it wasn't until the FBI got on board with Chris's permission, of course, that they're the ones who went to Google and said, hey, have you deleted this stuff yet? Could we check and see? And they did. And lo and behold, here we got a bad guy, all gooned up in his attire, wearing double gloves and a mask, and walking into that porch knowing where the camera was. And I say that with emphasis because that tells me this was a sophisticated abduction. It involved people, and I think more than one, who did preparatory work to take Nancy for money. And the sheriff's department was doing what they needed to do, Ashleigh, in look at the brother-in-law, look at the family members, look at people who worked at the house, any of those things. If she had a cleaning lady or a pool person or those folks, you got to look at all that. And I get that part of it. But there were parts of this that were dismissed. I'll give you another example. The blood that was found on the porch. That scene was opened up to effectively the public. And members of the press were standing in blood splotches on the porch. As a matter of fact, News Nation was the first one to put their camera down and go, oh, looky here. And it was only after that, and that made national news, that the sheriff's department went back and said, clumsy us, we got to close this scene down, which they did.
Why,
And then
why on earth? With your background, I was absolutely flummoxed by this on Monday, which effectively is just about 36 hours or so after Nancy vanished. Chris Nanos had opened the scene, stopped the search, and said there's nothing to be concerned about in the community. Why would anybody make those comments? And I don't want to I don't want this to be sort of a let's pile on him, but what would be the thinking behind somebody who would say, we closed the scene, there's nothing to be concerned about, and we've stopped the search?
I'm going to give you an opinion. And you asked me why. And it's very simple because I know the personality. It's because I say so, I'm in charge, and you do what I tell you. That's why.
Had to have an underlying reason, though.
Well,
What do you think the
there is
underlying
no
reason is?
reason. They closed off that house multiple times and went back and searched the area multiple times and they found things after the fact. What's intriguing to me is law enforcement responds to a case like this. Somebody's missing, they're elderly, and she was infirmed. We all know that. And what we learned from the family was she was bright. She had her mental faculties in place. She was not, succumbing to any kind of mental disability. So they did the right thing by enacting a search for her. That's the correct thing to do because that's one of the first things you do. You go outside the house, you look around the yards, the front yard, backyard, footprints, trails, wherever they might consider she could have wandered off to. Why? Because 9 times out of 10, when you're dealing with an elderly person who's missing, they've walked away. So
Mhm.
they answered that question on a search initially. They went back and they had, as we may recall from news reports, evidence in the bedroom, unspecified, evidence on the front porch, specified, blood, and of course, eventually a ring camera, or excuse me, a Nest camera video of some guy approaching the front door. It became clear within day 2 or 3 that this was an abduction, at least to me from the outside looking in. And yes, maybe I'm hypercritical, but it was clearly an abduction. The conclusion the sheriff's department came to was yes, but we have to consider all possible avenues. Family is one of them. Workers, friends, neighbors, church where she went. Did somebody have some vindictive reason to do this? We don't know those things initially. It became clearer and clearer as the investigation progressed. So there were a lot of mistakes made. And as I told you just before I started speaking 2 minutes ago, I see this clearly as an egocentric decision maker and a leader who won't let his team, who's talented, take the reins and do the things that they know how to do.
Can you weigh in on why even now, 6 months later, Brian Enton from News Nation reports that the FBI was back outside of Nancy Guthrie's house, behind the house. 6 months later, what could possibly bring agents back to that scene?
Well, they're now in the process of following up on tips. And as you may recall, there were thousands of tips that came in because this
Tens of
got
thousands.
tens of thousands. This got such widespread coverage, exposure nationally and internationally. Some of those tips may include, I'm not privy to them, but may include things that would cause law enforcement to go back and look at certain areas. You may recall just a few weeks after she was abducted, uh, and there was at least one ransom request, they went back to the house and they discovered gloves all around, not all around, but in various places around the property or just off the property. That's interesting. It turns out the DNA testing on those particular gloves were from the investigators or the search and
Yeah.
rescue folks or people known to the sheriff's department to be involved in the investigation. That's sad because it's careless of an investigator to do that. It contaminates a potential crime scene and it's problematic. But I attribute the FBI going back there just recently, in the last couple of weeks, to following up on tip number 4,612, whatever it may be. They've got to pursue this. Somebody asked me recently, do I think that this is a cold case? And the answer is absolutely not. There's so many tips they got to follow through on, and it takes dogged police work. It takes effort. And you have to rank the tips by the extent to which they're credible.
Mhm.
And by the extent to which somebody may or may not know something that makes some sense. Another example, the sheriff's department, within a few days after she was abducted, were asking the neighbors, have you got ring video or door camera video in place on a week before she was abducted? Do you have anything that looked weird? Can you look at your ring video and see if there's any trucks or vehicles in the neighborhood? They did that because they had some information that there may have been a suspicious vehicle in that neighborhood the week before she was abducted. And I don't know if they discovered any video that offered them any really evidence. I think I saw one where you see a car kind of leaving quickly down the street, but that was really
And I
kind
think
of
they
it.
dispensed with that one.
Yeah. And some of the evidence, of course, I'm not privy to. I've got, although I have people within the organization that have called me, and they too often, and ask for some input. And I'm in a position right now, having been retired, that I have no authority or responsibility to be involved in this at all. Notwithstanding all of that, Ashleigh, it's a complex case. There have been mistakes made, and it's my opinion they're attributable to the one guy who's running that organization.
Well, let's talk about our friends in the business because I've worked at lots of places and I maintain great relationships with people at other networks where I've worked, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all over the place. I've got pals and I always call them and I always get the skinny. And I'm wondering what your former colleagues at the Pima County Sheriff's Department are saying to you. What's the vibe right now about this case?
Well, there's not really any specificity that they're giving to me related to the case itself and the investigation. But I do hear from many, not one, not two, but many, who are afraid to make a move and do what they're trained to do or do what they're talented to do because of the micromanaging sheriff who will not allow his staff to do what they need to do without reprisal. And he has a reputation, and you hear me, and I hate to keep banging on him, but it's so clear to me that his personality type is what's inhibiting this case. But he has a reputation for being vindictive and uh, mean spirited. I could
We've
give you
heard
a
that.
story up for.
But because we heard that actually, I think within the first couple of weeks of this. And are you suggesting that what you're hearing from your former colleagues is that that's just stymieing their work week after week after
Yes,
week? And here we are, month six.
yeah, yes, I am hearing that. They're stifled. They are not allowed to do certain things without his approval. Real quick side story. You can edit this out if you want. I approved a $250 training uh, program for the Corrections Bureau. 400 people would benefit from this. And it was a Zoom type of a video where they could sit down for an hour and get some, in-service training. And he heard about it, and he actually he dismissed it and disapproved. Now I'm number two in the organization. He disapproved what I had already approved. And the reason is because the guy who was going to do the teaching did not support him during his election. This was a person who said derogatory things, I guess just like what I'm doing right now, but said derogatory things about him. So Chris disapproved a $250 training program out of a tens and tens of $1 million budget that the sheriff's department has. He found it, and his emotions involved themselves. He found it to be dismissed or dismissed the training. What does that do? That hurts 300 or 400 people who could potentially gain from that training. It's ludicrous. And it's just one example I share with you that indicates just how micromanaging he is and how he gets in the way of allowing the resources he has, the talent they have to do their job.
Do you think then? Well, I'll ask you what is the opinion of those working in the sheriff's department that this case will ever be solved?
I believe, and so do they believe, they will solve this case. The eventuality for that is the dogged police work that they're pursuing at this point.
So
And they
despite
may get
everything,
lucky.
despite all the micromanaging and the frustrations that they have that they're not able to do their job, even now at month six, despite all of that, they still feel confident they're going to solve the
They
case.
do. They do. There's
Why?
some, and I don't know what it is. Well, there is evidence that I'm not aware of. And that's okay. I don't need to be made aware of it. But there's evidence that they're pursuing. One of them is pretty clear, and it's been intimated by the sheriff department. It has to do with genealogy and familial DNA. You've heard that
Oh,
technology, and
sure.
it's a fairly recent technology where you have a bit of DNA that you can't identify in what we call the DNA bank. If a
Yeah.
bad guy got arrested 10 years ago and his DNA was entered into this bank, it's comparative but with what we have in our hands today to what it was then. And it will be very specific to a person. But that technology has grown and improved over the years to include a familial element to it. So people do 23andMe and other genealogy tests on themselves. Some of that data is in another data bank, DNA data, and there are ways to take this unknown source of DNA and attribute it to a family line that might produce
The person.
a bad guy at some
Yeah.
point.
A guy
And
who may not be in the bad guy bank. I mean, that's
right,
how Brian
right,
Kohberger was
exactly,
found.
the
It's how
bad
we're
guy bank.
finding Golden State
Yeah.
Killer. However, I'm very, I don't feel as good about that. Granted, I don't know everything about that sample that they found. It's just a sample of male DNA that is not in her immediate family or friends or circle of people that she knows. That doesn't mean that it's not just DNA from a FedEx guy. We don't know that it's
Well,
the bad guy. That's the problem. We don't know if that DNA they found belongs to the bad guy.
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I don't know what the source is of that DNA. And,
Yeah.
if the source was the glove that was on his hand at the time when I think he had two or three pairs of gloves on. But if the source was that, and they can get the certain type of glove that was purchased and where and when, I mean, there's aspects to this investigation that can get, you heard it about, I think the backpack,
Mhm.
and, or I forget what it was, the fanny pack, perhaps, I forget exactly. But they being the investigators, determined from where it was bought or
Yeah.
who carries that line. Now the question is, can you go to all those stores? Can you get the video feed around that time, et cetera, et cetera? So you can see the complexities here, and I'm sure your listeners and viewers will understand just how involved an investigation like this is, because could be
So
a lot of things you got to look at.
I understand the extraordinary length of time that it takes to go down the chain of familial DNA. Like I get it because it's now gumshoe work, right? You get this
Yes,
little sample and it could be thousands of potential people. You've got to weed it all out just by who's a woman, and who's
right,
90 and
right.
incapable of doing this. And then you got to get that sample of those who could be possibles. And then you got to find every single one of them. You got to track every single one of them, maybe follow them and grab their Coke bottle. I get how long that takes. But the rest of this case at 6 months, all those other aspects of forensic processing, that stuff I feel like would be done by now if they had something good.
Actually, I think you're right, Ashley, if they involve the FBI at a deeper level than they have. Believe it or not, Chris Nanos actually has the autonomy to decide whether the FBI helps him out or not. And they're the ones with the resources. They're the ones who have the psychological profilers. They're the ones who are the quintessential investigators for this country. And to put them in the sidelines for your own ego glory is absolutely amazing. And I
But
see that happening.
aren't
And
the
that,
FBI part of the task force? I mean, as I
of
understand
course,
it, they actually operate out of the FBI building. That the Pima County Sheriff's homicide folks that are on the task force, they go to the FBI building to work with the FBI every day.
right, that's true. But there was a task force in place prior to this abduction. And that task force was comprised of local law enforcement, meaning the sheriff's department, the city police department, and others, along with federal partners, DEA, for example, the FBI, as an example, Homeland Security, those types of things. So the task force was in place, and not a lot has changed there. What is happening, as per people who I've talked to, is that there's too tight of control uh, by the sheriff's department of others involved in this case. I would have given this case to the FBI day two, and this is an abduction. The involvement of the FBI is essential, especially when you have an abduction, and you may have any indication that that abduction took place or led to a place outside the state of Arizona or even another country. And I have a theory, and I don't know if you want to hear it or not, but it's
I
my
do.
theory that she was taken to Mexico. And I'll tell you why I think that. We didn't have that nest video for some time, but there were a lot of clues that suggest that this was a sophisticated and prepared crime. And if you think about the geography here in southern Arizona, we're 60 miles north of Mexico. That's where Tucson rests. If some buddies, plural, decided to abduct Nancy for Savannah's and family's money, and they knew that they would have to care for an 80 plus individual with medical needs, where else would you go? You would have to know that this was going to garner national attention. And where else would you go? It's a 90-minute drive down to the Mexican border. And by the time that you get there at 1, 2, or 3 in the morning, nobody's aware that Nancy's missing at that time. You can cross into Mexico, you know, without any concern whatsoever. One of the first things I think should have been done, and I don't, to this day, I don't know that that's happened, but I would have sent investigators down to the border and gone to each checkpoint and look at the video feed around the time zone, parameters we're looking at from her abduction, and see if a car went across with a man and an elderly lady in it. So you don't know that. And I don't know if that's happened. The FBI would be critical in attaining that because there are federal agencies involved in securing the border. There's also another little anomaly in Pima County. As I mentioned, this county is 9,200 square miles. This is a big county. And a large portion of that is juxtaposed to the Tohono O'odham Indian Reservation Nation. And they are an autonomous nation. And they have free access to and from the Mexican border. In other words, those citizens of that nation may traverse into Mexico and back into the United States unimpeded. There's no problem. They have that autonomy to do that. Could a person with a kidnapped lady in a car go down there and cross at that point? That's a 2-hour drive instead of 90 minutes down Interstate 19. So, yes. And I think that's a plausible explanation. I also think that that's a location where you're not under a microscope seeing the national attention that this thing got. Everybody in their neighborhood became aware. And if some guy's holding an older lady, they become aware of it. She's got needs. She's got medical needs. Could they be addressed in Mexico? Yeah. Could they have a locale in Mexico where they could put her? Yeah. If you took the preparation to set that up. Anyway.
I want to ask you about something else that recently happened, and that is that Sheriff Nanos, and I don't even know where we are on this chain of events, but originally he cleared the family members, and then he later waffled on it, and then made sure he was clear again that they're cleared. But just in the last few weeks, I'm recording this on August 14th, he said, just because you're cleared, these are my words, but effectively his message was, just because you're cleared doesn't mean you didn't do it. And I don't understand what that means.
That's a way of just leaving the possible doors all open, and you don't exclude any potential. That's what that means. It's analogous to him saying that he was asked directly, do you think Nancy's alive or that she's passed? And his response was, why would I dash any hopes of the family? And why would I give that opinion if it's going to affect the family? That's actually a self-serving comment. And the family doesn't want to know what you think or what you think you should be saying to them. They want to know what the investigators with the talents and the skills and the ability and the knowledge of what's going on with this case, they want to know what you think directly, not indirectly, not some sugar-coated, well, I don't want to dash their hopes. No, we all have compassion for the family. We all are hoping and praying for the best outcome. but I'm sure that the sheriff's department has some feeling about her situation at this point, and it's the same one I have. And I sadly think that she has passed and that those that abducted her don't have a bargaining person or chip anymore. And I don't mean to downgrade Nancy, but they don't have that. So what do you do? And it seems to me that, if she passed because of medical needs or what have you, um, you got to speak what you honestly think rather than try to sugarcoat it. I guess that's what I'm saying. So to get
No, I
back to
hear
your
you.
original question, we're not going to dismiss anything. It's just a blanket, broad brush comment to keep the doors open for everything, and that's what he's doing.
Rick, what are your thoughts about the specificity in the ransom note about the Apple Watch charging on the floor at the foot of Nancy's bed? That to me just was a alarm bells went off because first of all, how would anybody know? And it must have actually been there for them to have taken that seriously. And what woman would have her Apple Watch on the floor of her bed? Normally you charge it on your nightstand, especially if you're 84. Like that to me was a very unique detail.
I would agree with you. There's two sides to that. Well, first of all, if you're 84 years old and you have some physical limitations, putting it on the floor may not be the best idea. You got to bend over to deal with it. And as I get older, I realize that myself. Regardless, that specific information having been released in the demand is a little bit, it's got, it's kind of like a two-edged sword. I'll tell you why. You don't want to release everything you know because you want to have some parts of this investigation that only the bad guy knows and the good guys know. And the watch being on the floor and the color of the watch and all of that information could be something that could put validity to a person you're interviewing at some future date who you believe is the bad guy. You know, what did the room look like? There may be all kinds of questions you ask. And if that person were to spontaneously say, well, yeah, her watch was on the floor and the color of it was white and we stepped around it when I took her out, that then indicates to the investigators that they know this guy had to have been in that room. Now that's out to the general public. So the other side to this two-edged sword is they've released a critical piece of information along with the Bitcoin address, as we now know. They released this critical information that I think they should have withheld so that they could use that to determine the validity of a purported individual saying, I did it. And we already know that what happens there, people come forward and say, I'm the bad guy. Look at me. This is my opportunity to be a bozo on social media and in the press. I did it. And it's confounding to me. I can kind of understand part of the reasoning behind wanting to put that out, even in its raw form, because they wanted to express the writing style of the individual. There seemed to be a level of deference that the person who wrote that towards the family, with nature now, those kinds of soft approaches to addressing what they're saying happened. And that has a unique point of the that could be added to a psychological profile of a bad guy and whether the person is empathic or not and or empathetic I should say. So this is kind of an interesting way to resurface some of the critical elements in this case. I would hope and pray that the sheriff department has details and evidence that they're not going to release
Yeah.
whatsoever so that they then can do differentiation between who's the person telling the truth and who's making this up.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So,
I imagine that at 84, you're not charging your watch on the floor, but that in a struggle, that watch may have dropped, and that person may have actually known that detail and been able to include it, which gives that, ransom note a lot of credibility.
right.
Rick, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your insight, and also thank you for your decades of service.
Well, thank you kindly. It was a pleasure talking to you, Ashley. You take care and have a good day.
You too. My great thanks to Rick Castigar. So appreciate, at this point, everybody's voice matters because it seems like there's a one big effing mystery going on behind the walls of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and then that joint task force with the FBI. I can't imagine the FBI's too pleased to find out that their wire tickling in the Bitcoin wallet address got screwed with and was made public, and that everybody was able to see their message. We are ready to pay, contact us, followed by a private link to a web page. I can't imagine the FBI was too thrilled with that. But I also wonder if the FBI is doing a whole lot more that we don't know about, that the sheriff's deputies don't know about. Don't know. We'll keep following it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, everyone, truth isn't just serious. It's drop dead serious.